the quicker that you can compound that. If you were to take So welcome to the Rhyme Magic Show. Today I'm here with Timmy Morrison, who is a new friend of mine, and he's such a beautiful human. You guys got the bio and, achieved some incredible things, but really doing the work, and someone that I really look up to you, man. Such an embodied leader. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. I'm excited for our chat. There's so many different directions we could take it down. I had a random question pop up when we we're doing our eye gaze just before, which is, how come you shaved your head?
At a mushroom ceremony a couple of months ago, and in that ceremony, I was seeing these still immature parts of myself, still acting like a boy in different areas of my life, and
Mm.
was asking the mushrooms to help mature my energy during this ceremony, and they were maturing my energy for me, or helping me mature through this journey. And then I just saw my face, I saw my body, and saw me shaving my head and having a ceremony around shaving my head.
Mm.
And yeah, just clean shaven, and that was as if the next phase forwards was to shave all the hair off. And I was stoked, man, because in the vision I still had my beard, so I didn't have to shave my beard off as well. But yeah, so in the ceremony, in that vision, I had was shaved my head, and then a couple of days later, I had like another little kind of journey, little session, and the same vision came through. So a couple of days after that, man, I just set some space aside and had a little ceremony for myself and shaved my hair, shaved it off completely bald, and just
Oh.
let it all go, man. Because before my hair was like really long.
Mm.
Yeah, and it was powerful, man. I had like a big release as I was doing it, and I felt like straight away just all these energies like integrate into my body, and this new sense of self kind of come through straight away. And um, yeah, it's interesting, and seeing how different people would talk to me as well, from how I looked as well, which is really interesting. So yeah, brother, that's why I shaved my head, man.
That's really interesting. So tell me more about people talking to you differently after you'd shaved your head. How's that a thing?
Man, it was more older women, like elderly women, and like they would just like always look at me and always smile and stuff like that, man. That was the main one that I was seeing, hey, when I would like go out, and yeah, it was like there was like a different sense of calmness from people,
Mm.
which I was expecting kind of the different, man, because I looked kind of rough as soon as I shaved my head, man. Um, but yeah, it was kind of like the opposite way around. Hey,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm curious to know what was, you mentioned that you were wanting to step more into a calmer, more mature masculine energy. What for you did your hair symbolize that was less mature?
It wasn't that the hair was felt less mature. It was just what the mushrooms were showing, as in this is like just the next phase of your life, and that's just what's required to go through that. And there's like a lot of feminine work that I'd been doing, a lot of like express and release, and a lot of like emotional catharsis, which is all like very feminine in nature.
Mm.
And it was just like moving through that into this next phase, man. And it was more of like a wasn't really like an analytical kind of thinking. It was just like a visceral, somatic experience or knowing for me, and I just went with it, brother.
Yeah. So it's just more, it was more of a random symbol. Could have been anything. It could have been getting a tattoo or,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I
yeah.
think like that as well, just shaving off, like, because you hold so much energy and stuff in your hair as well, man. And it was just like, shaving all of that off and just making myself bare and just, being reborn almost, So it's just
Yeah.
this, yeah,
So much depth to a haircut.
yeah.
It's the deepest chat about a haircut anyone's ever had. Love it.
Yeah, yeah.
I
You
was, the
love it now,
reason
man. Yeah.
I was curious because I know Preston Smiles recently cut his beard off because there was an attachment to it, and I was
Uh-huh.
wondering if there was any part where you like really loved the look of your hair, and you're like, I, it's going to be nerve wracking for me to cut off my hair because I
Uh,
like the look of it, you know?
yeah, I did. I mean, I definitely like the look that I had, man. And I think like I was kind of known for like how my hair looked and how my beard was and all of that. And there was definitely some like identity attached to it.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, I think that was probably part of it as well, man, of just letting go of that old identity, which was attached to some still immaturity. So this new wave of energy could, be integrated and grounded into my body.
Mm.
Yeah,
Well, I actually never knew you when you had longer hair, but since I've known you, uh, that's the main quality that shines through alongside your really strong, loving energy is a groundedness.
hmm,
Like I feel like you epitomize groundedness. It's just a really
thanks, man.
calm, nice energy. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
beautiful. My absolute pleasure. So I'm curious to know because the intention that's coming through for this episode that I like what I'd like to learn from this, and as a result, the listeners have no choice but to learn the same shit. Is to really get a sense of how you see uh, what a mature integrated man looking like, and 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 I really want to probe into asking questions around the nuances of what comes out from like a more of a prescribed, categorized, archetypal perspective, just like understand and allow the viewers to really understand what it looks like and feels like and how to transition to being a full integrated masculine man in this society and what your perspective on what that looks like is, man. So if you want to kick off with the question of like what does an integrated man mean to you?
Yeah, cool. So I think like first, like an integrated ground man doesn't necessarily like, look like anything
Mm,
in particular, like the way that they style or anything like that. It's more of a the feeling and the energy that emanates from them. And there's
mm,
definitely some attributes that really integrated grounded men um, possess, and that is one is taking responsibility and ownership for their life,
mm,
and not like putting the onus of responsibility onto somebody else. Um, and for a lot of men, it's learning how to actually become grounded into their bodies,
mm.
and being grounded in all that they are. And we lack a lot of initiated men in our society, and so
Can I
this is like,
intercept? Sorry to cut you off, Tim, on that last point around you said integrating men into their bodies more. Is that
mhm,
as opposed to the fact that we have so many environmental triggers in the city and like the metropolis world of the modern day world to get into our heads, and it's like the as like
yeah,
an opposite of that.
yeah, exactly. And I think most people, men and women, you know, can be get stuck in their head.
Mm,
And it's about learning how to ground, bring yourself more back into your body, so then you can have a more of like a body experience. And for most people, we live in a hyper stimulated world. So our nervous system's always jacked, always running in our sympathetic nervous system state, which is our fight or flight. So we're always in a state of survival,
mm,
seeing everything as a threat. So learning how to ground back into the body, and we all have our shadows, we all have our wounding and things like that, and it's most people don't want to be in their bodies because there's a certain level of unresolved emotional wounds and trauma that's in there, and coming into your
mm,
body means that you have to feel that. um, so for a lot of men, it's and this is for women as well, man, is to come back into the bodies, to work through what is in there, so then they can move forwards in life and come into a deeper sense of wholesome and unity within the self.
beautiful, man. Really well said. Would you say that there's because getting more into the body and therefore feeling the parts of ourselves where there's certain emotional energies or traumas that we haven't looked at
Mm-hmm.
yet, I can really recognize the more pinnacle events that you can have to work through trauma, like doing a trauma release session or doing some
Mm-hmm.
kind of uh, psychedelic plant medicine ceremony where the intention is to release, or like a trauma release coaching session, being coached, or just doing your own emotional release techniques, kind of like more reactive events to
Mm-hmm.
remove it. Is there ways that you encourage people, or like what are the ways that you encourage men, men and women, but to get into their bodies more on a consistent basis? Because I find I'm getting in my head like every day, and I do the work, like I do a lot of coaching sessions and I do a lot of ceremonies to remove and release stuff, but it's in between
Mm-hmm.
those that I find myself getting caught in my head 1,000 times a day.
Mm-hmm.
what do you encourage people to do to be more in their bodies and therefore feel more present and empowered?
The first one is coming into the breath, and the breath
Mm,
is so powerful, man. It's a really simple tool, and it's something that's free and available to us every single second of the day. And it's only how to use your breath to calm yourself down and to just become more present within your body, within whatever's happening around you. And like a
mm,
consistent breath work practice, where you're actually helping to train your nervous system state to be more grounded, to be able to handle more stress, to be more present and be more
mm,
aware of your surroundings.
So how do you prescribe that? Because what I'm finding for me is like I've got so many rituals that I do daily,
Yeah.
but then in between the rituals, I get stuck in my head so quickly, and especially at the stage of transition at the moment that I'm going through with my career and moving on from a breakup, things fly around in my head so often, and I do breath work and meditation. I do meditation twice a day and I exercise every day. And I do all these things that are daily, but it's in between those. Do you prescribe, like, for example, set an alarm every 30 minutes in your phone, or just every time you recognize you're in your head, a certain breath technique or something
Yeah,
that's,
yeah. So there's two that I really get people to work through, and one is box breathing, and it's just 4 second inhale through the nose, a 4 second pause, a 4 second exhale, and a 4 second hold um, at the
mm,
end. So it's in through the nose, out through the mouth, and you just continue that flow through, and you can do it for 10 minutes. And the other one is extending the exhale longer than what the inhale is, generally like double. So you'd breathe in for 4 seconds, exhale out for 8 seconds, and that's really going to help stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system state. But see,
mm,
the thing that is really important is to be able to relax your nervous system state enough that you can really look into those thoughts and the reasons why you are like getting stuck in your head. And don't get me wrong, there's definitely times when your mind is powerful and your mind is needed to get things done and to note what you want to do. But it's
mm,
a balance between the two. It's not just going to be in your body the whole time. It's working through the both. But if there's like specific things that are happening for people and for yourself, like with your going through with a relationship breakup, there's just
mm,
different techniques, and sometimes it's just more one-on-one sessions to help work through those specific things that are coming up for you.
mm,
And then also like on your own time using your breath to soften yourself enough to allow the emotions that are coming up, because sometimes we want to disassociate from our body because there's shit coming up that we don't want to feel. So when our mind starts to race, it's pretty much just a protective mechanism. So if we can
mm.
soften our breath enough to come into our body, we'll be able to feel what it is that we're trying to protect ourselves from, and then to work through that.
Yeah. I've got some follow-up questions for this. I'm really glad we're talking about it because, for me, my issue has always been if there's two ways that you can approach having oh, there's three ways that you can approach feeling kind of stuck. You could dissociate and just ignore, or you could dissect and go deep and figure out what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
or direct it to get kind of back to a point where you can, like what you said, sometimes you got to take action and stuff. My pattern and what I will tend to do is dissect. And I'm not afraid of looking at the wounds and feeling the emotion. And it's been more when I'm needing to direct and actually get more productive that I'm struggling.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because I really have just spent so much time. Like, let's say, for example, since I broke up with my ex, it's been almost 4 months, probably done like 40 different coaching sessions, being coached 40 times, each with the intent of being as like vulnerable as possible and releasing emotion and like understanding the learnings from the last relationship and my wounds that I was scared to look at and all of this kind of. So really have done like a lot. And I always do that. But then my nervous system is so used to surrendering and dissecting that actually having some discipline and then directing and moving forward has actually been my toughest thing because my pattern now is to dissect. And
Mm-hmm.
so it becomes impractical sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So do you suggest, like, if I was feeling a certain way throughout the day, something comes up for me, and obviously discernment is required if it's a big emotional release and something that really does just really needs to be looked at and brought up and out and work through. Do you suggest doing like you feel something and then do box breathing for a few minutes and then just move on, and just like you might do box breathing like 10 times a day, or how does it how can it look?
Yeah, I think each person is different with that, and I feel like if you're used to, if your default is to dissect all the time and really go into it all the time, then your work would be creating more structure and discipline for yourself, and knowing that
Mm,
like your emotions don't control you. Your emotions are just energy flowing through your body, and
mm,
there's some aspect of yourself that finds comfort within the emotions, within like heavy emotions, and then so you will like automatically go into that,
mm,
and you're letting like allowing your emotions to really take control of your your everyday life, which isn't ideal. It's not what we want to be doing. And this is when we're really kind of tapping more into like the masculine energy, and especially working with men, teaching men to become more grounded in their bodies and be more grounded in their own masculine energy. And really, like the masculine energy is that safe container, and it's that structure as well. And it's the like if the feminine is the river, the masculine is the river banks. That's like guiding that both work in conjunction. But if you're falling into
mm,
the emotional side all the time, then we need to bring in more structure and help that breath be more grounded, not just breathing into your belly, but breathing down into your balls, breathing down into your legs, breathing down into the earth,
mm,
and knowing that you are always in control of your inner workings. Like, and your breath is that gateway towards that, and that you
mm,
don't have to fall victim into emotions. A lot of the time, people will fall victim into their emotions. They'll be like, "Oh, I got to go work in this. I got to go work in that," and it happens when
mm,
people start to step into say like these kind of cathartic emotional spaces. They feel like they have to keep digging, and finding the next thing that they have to release. Have to find the next thing they have to release. So I just done my mother, and now I got to do my father, and I've got this trauma, and then they just keep digging and digging and digging, and they get stuck in this in this mud, and they're not learning to like actually pull themselves out of that mud
mm,
and find more joy and find more bliss in their life, and going on the two ends of the spectrum with that. But they're just falling in that in that kind of like that darkness, and that darkness can be very seductive at the same time. And we release like chemicals when we have these emotional releases, and sometimes people get addicted to that at the same time. And
mm,
so it's learning like what your default mechanisms are, and working with that to help you move forwards.
mm,
And some people are just going through a lot of shit, man. That's where they need to be. But if you can't let that run your life either, especially if you're trying to like run your own business and things like that, man. You have to, you know, have structure around what you're doing too.
mm.
Um, and
Beautiful.
like for example, if like you find it really hard to let go of your ex girlfriend, like what part of you is still trying to hold on to her? What's part of you still trying to hold on to the idea of what it was like when you guys were together, and looking at that, and
Yeah.
then moving forwards.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all of that. It's really powerful. And I really like what you said about discerning discerning what is your default. Where do you tend to feel safe in, whether it's the deflecting and disassociating and numbing, or whether it's directing and just like, which is, I think probably it's a solid healthy way to go, more healthy way where you're not negating it and pushing it down, but you're getting back into what you really feel pulled to do next. And then the dissecting, which is looking at it, feeling it. So for me, I think the interesting thing is I'm learning to navigate emotions, and I'd be curious to know and hear your feedback on this with all the men's work that you've done, because I was very much dissociate and numb and direct. They were my two things. The actual dissection and looking deeper wasn't a thing for me because I didn't have time, because I didn't make time based in my head of like this insatiable drive of like keeping busy and being successful and growing and growing and growing and growing and
Mm-hmm.
doing and doing and doing and doing. So for me, the idea of feeling, I think it was just a it's almost like police tape around this scene of like around this door saying do not go in that door, because if you do, Pandora's box is going to be opened and then you'll be like, I think that was my deep fear, and I just therefore suppress, but I wouldn't have been able to say and acknowledge that that's what I was doing because I had no awareness at all. But
Mm-hmm.
then recently opening Pandora's box and learning to explore my emotions, it hasn't learned to settle and be, for me to be able to discern what's required each time. Sometimes I do, often I don't. I'm still learning. So it's like I'm feeling this way, and then I'll dissect in my head, and then I'll go, holy crap, there's emotions under this, and then I'll go into the emotions, and then I'll be like, crap, should I be directing and getting back into productivity? Do I need more time to sit in these feelings? What's the right thing? But I'm definitely moving further and further away from the numbing and disassociating stuff, which I think's healthy.
Mm.
But it's interesting that it's, yeah, there's a whole skill set to navigating life and resistance and as a human and as a man that I never even knew was a thing before.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
picking apart what you were saying to Sam, man, is actually like learning how to self-regulate yourself,
Mm,
how to self-regulate your nervous system, how to self-regulate your emotions, and it's something that we're never taught, right? So, when you can't self-regulate, you will always like lean into like more emotions, or you'll get like stuck in them, or you won't know when to stop and things like that. Man, you won't know how to like create safety and support for yourself. So
mm,
especially when people start to go through like a lot of like emotional release, like I really prefer to have them in workshops where it's in a in a container where there's a start and finish and everything can kind of be closed back up. Because
mm,
sometimes people just don't know when to stop, especially if they've never really been in that space before. But learning how to self-regulate yourself, man, is of so much importance for everyone. And you can self-regulate yourself through your breath or through, say, like look at your physical body, your nervous system. You can self-regulate through like gentle movement or like primal movement or through yoga, which can help down regulate your nervous system um, enough for you to really tap into where you're at. Using meditation to self-regulate, using your breath to self-regulate, and using some sound as well to self-regulate as well, like making like say you're doing some breath work, you can take a nice deep breath in, and as you exhale out, coming out with like a deep or like a hum, and feeling that sound vibrate through your whole body.
mm.
Um, and knowing that emotions, they only really last for like 10 to 15 seconds really as they're coming in, but it's our body that contracts and holds onto it, and then we become identified as the emotion, not just allowing the emotion to flow through. And that's like a big shift that I teach guys, is that like I am not I'm not angry, like I am feeling angry, or I am, they'll say like I am sad, but or I am upset, but I am feeling upset, I am feeling sad, I am feeling angry, rather than like
Mm.
identifying themselves as the emotion. They're identifying that which they're feeling.
Do they feel it more if they identify with it, in your
Well,
opinion?
then they other things come into it, like shame can come into it, because then they're feeling like they are this emotion. Makes
Mm.
sense, yeah.
And then they feel shame. So they're like,
You,
I am sadness. I'm a sad sort of person, or like a down low sort of person. And then they're like, I don't like being low. So when they feel low, instead of allowing it to move through that 15 seconds and getting on with it, they're just like, oh, it's me doing this sad thing again. There's something wrong with
yeah,
me. And therefore they slip into shame and it gets stuck there.
yeah, and yeah, beat themselves up and
Yeah. So what do you see as the value? Because actually, I've got a quick thing first. Society, from most of what I've seen with human beings that aren't in the personal development space, they find ways to regulate themselves, but it's often with numbing. So it
mm,
might be by like bickering or bitching at people, or might be by achieving or working harder, or it might be by trying to look even sexier or hotter, or doing like drinking alcohol, doing drugs,
mm.
emotional eating, and all these different strategies. Do you, like, from your just objective view of society, do you see that similarly, or do you think that's like do you think people just come up with a coping mechanism now, and because what they've got access to in this world, in this at the supermarket, with social media, people are just trying to self-regulate and they're just doing all they know how, which is like grab some of these short-term gratification things. But like back in the tribal days, they wouldn't have access to that stuff, and therefore it would have been a lot easier to regulate if you're in the bush, for example.
Yeah, 100%, man. I think a lot of people are trying to, but for the most people, they're just trying to cope through life. They're trying to survive through life. And most people are living in survival, man. So they're trying to cope. They're trying to, regulate themselves, and everyone is doing the best that they can, given their
Yeah.
awareness and consciousness that they're at. And that's the biggest thing, man. And you only know what you know until you know something different. And this is why this work is important, because the more that people have awareness around it, the more people that you start to step into self development, no matter whatever it is, it's going to start to highlight these different areas for them. And they can
Mm,
start to make their own shifts and changes.
yeah. It's interesting 'cause sometimes because I haven't been used to feeling emotions and arguably, I guess it's be a lack of the masculine in this feminine release, but I haven't felt as in control when I'm expressing emotions. And therefore I felt like, my uncle, for example, who has beers every night and has a stable life, been living the same life for ages. I'm thinking, is this guy got his shit together? Like, this guy seems like he's got his shit together way more than I do in this moment. I'm like doing all this personal development stuff and I'm all over the place, feeling emotions, having days off. He's just rocking up solidly in his job with a seemingly like happy family, not doing any of the personal development work, and just learns to navigate around any of the stretches or traumas, not
Mm.
addressing them, but then seems like to be quite functional in a lot of ways of people that don't engage in personal
Mm.
development. What's your perspective on that?
Well, one, we never know exactly what someone's going through, what they've been
Yeah.
through, what they're thinking, and where they're currently at. And some people are really good at putting masks on that everything's okay, and sometimes it's not. That's one of the biggest killers for men is that they suffer in silence. Um,
Mm,
when if you've never you know done any kind of emotional cathartic work, as soon as you kind of like open up the valve of that, it's just like a floodgate, just open up, and a lot of emotions, kind of come through. But what you're experiencing is the full force of your own feminine energy,
mm,
and for a lot of men, that feels unsafe to have that wild expression. And if you were taught at a young age that emotions, like boys don't cry, don't be angry or anything like that, then you already have like a negative association to this feminine energy, this expressive energy. And it's one of the reasons why so many men suppress women, is because they actually they fear the feminine energy. They feel
mm,
unsafe in the feminine energy, because the feminine energy is wild, man. It's chaotic, it's destructive, but it's also like nurturing and radiant. It's like this incredible wild energy, man. And
mm.
so what you're actually feeling is the full extent of that, and is like feeling safe in that wildness. And then as you start to really embrace your own feminine energy, your interaction with the opposite sex will be completely different, and there'll be a different sense of honoring in that, and honoring the feminine in others.
That's
And
such a
then
good
like
point.
and this is this is why there's so much you know raping of the earth as well, man. Is that so many men are suppressing the energy within themselves. They suppress the feminine energy within their partners, and then they do the same to Mother Earth. Um, and then so as we start to really tap into ourselves, and we know that we are the same as everyone else, then
Mm.
everything will start to shift and change.
Yeah. So with that suppression of themselves, like if we just stereotype high up COO in an oil and gas company, for example, that's got a normal kind of family but works super hard and doesn't show any emotion.
Hmm.
When you say he's suppressed, he's disassociated from his emotions, and as a result, is is almost like numbed to the feeling or the effect of what his actions have on the world.
Yeah, he's like disconnected from himself, disconnected from his true self, his true values. Um, and there's so many more like heart-centered business entrepreneurs that are coming through,
Mm,
and people that are actually connected to all parts. So you got to be connected to your mind, you got to be connected to your heart, you got to be connected to your primal self, to your primal center, and integrating all three together is exactly what people need. And you can't just be heart centered without being. So for a lot of men, they've been like emotionally castrated,
mm,
metaphorically castrated, man. So they're not connected into their balls anymore. So we get a lot of people that just want to be heart centered, but they're no longer connected to their primal self, which can
mm,
also cause issues too. And people have a lot of negative association to people's primal centers, or to their own primal center, and it's one of the most suppressed energies that we work through, because
mm,
there's so much energy that's in there.
mm.
Yeah.
So, what does that look like before and after? As some examples of what it looks like to be a more integrated man? Because you mentioned it doesn't look a certain way from like a personality or an expressive
Well, like you,
perspective. Like it's not like, oh, he's then in business or he's got shorter hair and wears a suit. It's nothing like
yeah,
that. But
yeah,
what does it actually look like from an energetic perspective, and how can a man's life change if he makes it through a good chunk of the initial work required to become an integrated
yeah.
man?
I feel like you just have this sense that they're more trustworthy, right? You can trust them.
Mm,
They're not, you know, you can feel when someone's emotionally unstable, and um, you can feel this sense of like leadership within them. It's just like emanating out. You know, you can feel it when you meet someone, if they're like grounded or if they're quite flighty. Um, but a big part for men is, you know, uncovering all these areas of themselves, and we all got to do our own shadow work, and our shadows is everything that we've denied, that we've disowned, that we've rejected about ourselves, and that we generally see this in other people, where we lay judgment, where we lay ridicule, where we point the finger of blame onto others. It's generally, you know, stuff that we haven't actually owned within ourselves yet.
mm.
So when men start to really uncover these areas of themselves, there's actually so much power and so many gifts that are inside the shadow. Um,
Can you give
that
some
is
examples of some common masculine shadows that you see come up in the men's work that you do? Suppressed.
Yeah, so this is like for both sexes, man. So, you know,
Yeah, cool.
we can have like our mind shadows, but then we also have the shadows that express itself through the body as well. So we have like, but you know, it can be anything, man. It can be like people's anger or aggression. So if you know you learn from a young age that anger is bad, that anger is destructive, then you will suppress that anger. And you know, if you suppress your anger, two things will either happen for men. One is that they'll suppress it so deeply that they are no longer able to um, interact with it, and they will come across as a nice guy, the people pleaser, and they will
Mm,
lack boundaries in every single area of their life.
mm,
Or they'll be overly expressive in this anger, and it'll be like pushed out sideways, and it'll come through like passive aggressiveness and ridicule and things like that. But the thing with anger is that anger isn't actually a bad emotion. Anger like works in two parts, bro. One of them is, you know, anger is teaching us about our boundaries, where our boundaries have been crossed or where our boundaries are about to be crossed. And it also teaches us where there's going to be a threat in our life. So anger actually rises up to bring us some fire in us, so that we are able to work with this threat that is, you know, about to come into us. The other thing with anger is also like a protective energy, or and a protective emotion, and it's generally like covering up deeper laying grief, sadness, shame, guilt, and it's protecting us in there. So anger isn't bad. It's how anger is expressed, which can become unhealthy. So the big
mm.
thing with anger is learning to still have compassion and still being in your heart when you're feeling this anger. So you're not projecting it outwards, but you're standing strong and you're standing firm with this fire within your body, and you can set your own boundaries of what, you know, is acceptable and what's not acceptable. And when this, you know, anger, you know, forms into rage and into really unhealthy aggression, then that's where it's, you know, starting to be destructive and unhealthy, and can come across as, you know, like toxic, for example. Others can be shame, you know,
Before we jump onto
shame
them,
that,
can I ask a question on anger?
yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So let's say, for example, I've got a couple of friends that have come over for dinner, and like I was thinking about this, I was feeling a bit triggered last night when I was with a couple of my friends, because I was talking about, somehow conversation came up with about my ex, and it was just like I was noticing a bit of anger in my body about the fact that it was a topic of conversation,
Mm-hmm.
but I kind of just kept talking about it. And then upon reflection, when you were talking about the fact that there's a boundary that's been breached, I don't feel like I have a bound. Like, I don't think I had even the awareness that there was a boundary that I was allowing being crossed within myself to open up a
Mm-hmm.
topic that I don't really want to focus on at the moment, but I just
Yep.
allowed it to be there. And then as a result, the kind of frustration built up in my body. And then I actually just punched my friend in the face. No, I'm joking. No, then it just like, we actually did like an emotional release thing because they're conscious friends. But if I think I could have jumped in probably and said, hey, look, this is something that I don't want to talk about. How do you recommend someone can stay in their heart during a setting like that? Like, let's say I'm sitting at the table something's frustrating me. How can I stay in my heart and communicate a boundary at the same time?
It's always with the breath, man. And this is why like self-regulation is so important, because learning how to breathe and when to breathe is going to create a pause so that you respond rather than reacting. It's always
Mm,
coming into the breath, man. And boundaries are for us to teach others how we want to be treated and what we what we're going to be tolerating in our life.
mm,
So like as soon as sometimes we don't know what our boundary is until it's been crossed, is where we go, holy fuck, that doesn't feel good to me. So
mm.
when it's like that, you just take a deep breath, breathing in, breathing into your belly, out through the mouth. Take a pause and be like, hey, I actually don't want to talk about my ex right now. I'm happy to talk
Mm,
about other things, but right now I don't want to be talking about my ex.
mm.
It's as simple
Amazing.
as that, and then just letting that go.
I think the main thing there, and I'm sure lots of people listening can relate as well, that the idea of that pleaser, of not wanting to say anything, this is what I can relate to at least. It's uncomfortable to say, hey, I don't want to talk about my ex, as if I've got shame about the fact that I even want to say something that stops the flow of conversation.
Yeah, so
That's how
that's really
crazy it is.
yeah, that's really interesting, Brand. So like aggression inflates us, right? It builds up this like we release adrenaline, and so
Mm,
it inflates us. It gives us this sense of like being really really powerful, which is aggression that has been needed in life in certain times to evoke that, right? But aggression inflates us, and shame deflates us. So shame, people collapse into themselves when they're experiencing shame. You will watch someone that is feeling very shameful, like a child, for example. You will see that their power center, like their chest will like collapse into itself, their shoulders will be rounded, like their heart will be closed, and the head will be looking down. So the body like collapses into itself, like and it deflates. So
that's
what you just
literally my physiology. That's been my physiology since I've been younger.
yeah,
Like if you look at my body, like my
yeah,
shoulders round naturally,
uh-huh. So
and
yeah,
I,
whole lot been trying to protect your heart.
yeah,
So pretty much what you just um said then is that you're, even though this has happened all unconscious for you, right? You have shame about talking about your ex girlfriend, but your default is to go on to anger and to aggression because it's inflating you. And what happens is when
mm,
there's a lot of aggression, we can't soften into the anger is like protecting that shame that you're feeling. So rather than you even wanting to go into the shame, this is happening unconscious for you. You
mm,
want to actually go into this anger, into this aggression, so then you don't have to feel this. And this is a thing like that happens in a lot of men's work. They'll do a lot of like primal screaming, which has its place because it can give that outlet for a lot of pent up aggression. But if you're not looking at what lies underneath, then you're just
mm.
wiping the cream off the top of the cup, and you're not seeing what is actually underneath. And it's just kind of like gives it like a false sense of release. And it's that aggression that's just pumping the self up, making them feel good about themselves when like what is that anger there for? Is it trying to cover up another emotion, or is it trying to teach you about a boundary? And for
Mm.
yourself is happening on those two areas. One is for your boundaries, and two is you're not allowing yourself to feel shame around what's there for you and your ex-girlfriend.
Yeah, yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
Thanks for sharing that, man. It's powerful stuff. And what I've found is it's been really difficult for me to share vulnerable emotions, what I consider to be more vulnerable emotions like crying and sadness and grief and shame, unless I fatigue my body first.
Mm-hmm.
So I find it quite difficult just to experience sadness
Mm-hmm.
until I've tensed my body heaps to the point that I can't tense anymore. And then it just surrenders. And then I get sad. Like the anger has to be out and
Yeah.
then sadness comes after.
Yeah, and that's just part of the process, man. Is learning how to soften yourself into an emotion, and then
Mm,
each process has its own different entry point. And for some men, especially if they're able to tap into anger and aggression really really easy, a lot of their work is learning how to soften themselves into their own grief, how to soften themselves to feel their own guilt, how to soften themselves to feel their own shame. And even shame and guilt, shame is showing us, it's shame is I am a bad person, and guilt is saying that I have done something bad, and it's learning how to work with those two different emotions and those feelings that we have. Yeah, man, there's so much in this to take people through these processes, but you know, a big part is learning how to soften yourself into it. Because if you are getting angry all the time, it's like then you're now teaching your nervous system that you have to be angry before you get sad. When really it's like you can do this thing where it's like somatic tracking, where you can track the emotion and to it's like I kind of like it's like seducing the emotion, man. Like you can close your eyes and you can track where the emotion lies in your body, and you use your breath to gently just move that through your body and to feel it like kind of like seduce it up and out. And
Mm.
I say seducing because this is like seductive energy with the feminine energy, right? It's like this
Mm.
seducing that comes through.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, man. Thank you for sharing that. What I really like about that is the idea that emotions, the less that, the more that I'm aware of the fact that I have emotions, the more that I'm willing to look at them and actually take the idea that there's information in those emotions. Uh, that there's actually information. Like if I'm angry, then there's something that I'm protecting myself from, or something that. Well, what were the other two that you mentioned under anger?
One is you know, you're covering up something that lies underneath. So it could be shame, could be guilt, it could be sadness,
Mm,
it could be grief, or it's you know you're protecting yourself from a boundary, or you're trying to set yourself
the
a
boundary.
boundary. The boundary, yeah. The two main ones, yeah.
Yeah. I didn't even know what a bound like I'd heard the idea of a boundary. Like I knew intellectually what it was, but I never even considered the fact that I had boundaries all the time, and so many of which I wasn't even aware of or had set, and were just being like I didn't have many boundaries. It's just like a
Mm.
crazy idea.
Yeah, and you know boundaries will shift and change as you shift and change as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
It's
you
like
know
a
some
way to navigate who you currently are at your current stage of consciousness and
exactly,
fullness,
exactly.
right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And you know some people will put boundaries up that then turn into walls, and then they just use that as barriers to keep people out, and they're not you know willing to work with that. Um,
Mm,
but you know we get to teach people how we want to be treated as well.
yes.
We get to teach people how we want to be loved, how we want to be supported, you know, and these are things that, you know, we're never really kind of taught younger. We kind of just taught that we just get what we're given.
Yes.
But as we mature, you know, we get to set our own boundaries of what we want, of what we don't want. And it's
Mm.
powerful to say yes to something, it's powerful to say no to something when it's true for you.
This is a whole new ball game for me that I've been exploring over the last 2 months, and it's blown my mind at how I could have been existing in the world without being aware of the idea of boundaries, and then allowing myself to, because of the innate shame, I believe for me, just walking around not feeling like I'm a good person or I'm a worthy person, then had the symptom of that was what you just mentioned there, I'll just take what's happening to me or the way things are and not realize that I can teach people how to treat me. It's just
Mm.
like sounds such a simple idea, but it's something that was making such a huge impact on the way that my life was.
Yeah.
And it's still like I'm opening all these different, like I said, I only thought about that boundary last night. The idea that I could have said, hey, I don't want to talk about this, but I wasn't aware of that last night.
Hmm.
It could have even been a thing. Only upon reflection now have I opened awareness of it.
Exactly. That's what I was saying before. I mean, like, you only know what you know until you know something different, right? And it's
Mm,
don't beat yourself up on something that you never knew.
yeah.
And it's so easy for people to do that. Be like, oh fuck, I should have known that. I didn't know that. And then you beat yourself up. Be like, well, actually, I didn't actually know that, but now I do. Now I know
Mm,
better, so now I can do better.
mm. Do you have any tips for practices that people can use to inflate themselves in a heart-centered way? So combat shame, essentially, like any for the purpose of awareness. So yeah, like if, for example, if I'm walking around not feeling like I'm enough, is there any ways that I can feel more whole within myself in a way that's not then ego inflation, but just like genuine, really loving on myself?
Um, yeah, the first is coming into you know self love and self worthiness practices, and that can look different for each person depending on you know where they're at. For myself, man, I sometimes I feel like they can just be like blanket kind of like yeah you know you do some mantras and I feel worthy. But what I'd like to do is actually get people into a deeper space, man, so you can go really deep into the why they don't actually feel unworthy, like where did that actually start?
Mm,
Because trying to figure out how deep to go with this with your brother. Like, there's, we have like our inner critic, we have like our ego, and the inner critic is the voice of shame, of internalized shame from external sources. So it's learning how to change the voices in our mind to rather than to bring in this sense of unworthiness, to bring in like why you do feel worthy, like what in the past have you done, like find evidence of times in the past where you have done things that have been worthy, and parts of yourself that you're grateful for, that you love about yourself. And
Mm.
for some people, like some people can't find one thing that they love about themselves, and it's just starting with one thing that you like about yourself. And
Mm.
eye gazing with yourself in front of the mirror. It could be your shoulders, could be your elbows, it could be your chest, it could be your legs, it could be your face, your eyes. Just picking one thing that you're grateful for, that you love about yourself.
Mm.
But for me, man, like I much prefer to have people in a workshop, in a ceremonial space or breathwork, whatever. We can take them really deep and really uncover these deeper reasons that is creating that sense of unworthiness.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And you remember at the start of this chat where I was like, I feel as though there's more reactive, big attempts at healing, and then there's more proactive day-to-day ones.
Mm-hmm.
What I do a lot of the big broad brushstroke changes, but then like
Mm-hmm.
the finer tuning, the consistency, like every day, having the space to, like what you mentioned there, eye gaze, like eye gazing with yourself, right? Creating an accomplishment board or saying the things that you're proud of yourself for and
Mm-hmm.
you love about yourself. I feel like from the summary of this chat and all the other work that I've done and whatnot, it's just a process of giving yourself grace, and it's never thinking that the job's done, but just always being willing to address what comes up in a kind way, and then give
Mm-hmm.
yourself what you need in that moment, and then moving on from there. I think for me, the suppression or the pressure that have put on myself to, or the judgment of the resistance points is what's caused the most
Mm-hmm.
resistance,
Yeah.
magnified the resistance.
Yeah, and celebrating the small wins as well. Celebrate the small wins. It's so important to recognize and your own accomplishments of what you do. Just
Mm,
celebrating the small things that you do in life, because the small things done consistently is what creates habits. Is what creates long lasting change. And when we into any kind of this work, like your stage of development needs to match somewhere around the level or state of experience that you've just gone through. So you can have these deep kind of cathartic experiences, but if your like stage of development isn't at a level where you can actually consciously understand or integrate what you've just been through, then it doesn't have too deep of an effect, or like you have a deep effect, but it won't be like sustainable, it won't be long lasting. And this is the marry between the two of having these deep cathartic experiences, or these life changing experiences or breakthrough moments, and then having consistent small changes, day to day changes, which is going to help
mm.
integrate those processes.
So interesting. This chat's just everything's just tying in so nicely. I had a chat the other day with a friend of mine who was talking about this idea that you in spiritual development you can transcend the ego, but then you, but if you transcend the ego without maturing the ego, then it's just like in and out, these wild ups and downs. Like you could be in a deep spiritual ceremony and feeling
Yeah,
so grounded, connected, and then leave. And because your ego is really immature, cause that you haven't been doing the work for a long time, or those ongoing simple things haven't been done for long enough to really mature the soul or the ego, then it's such there's a lot more reactiveness and less groundedness to hold space
yeah.
for the
I
ego.
think I think when people want to transcend the ego, they're just spiritual bypassing, and they're just they're not allowing themselves to have this human experience. So we're spiritual beings having a human experience, not humans
Mm,
trying to have a spiritual experience, right? So um, we have these wounded traits of the ego, like blaming, deflecting, denying things, judging, justifying things,
mm,
and we have this wounded self that's like acting through this way. And our ego is our identification of the self. It's like who we are.
Mm.
So we're never gonna, lose that. But it's not allowing the not allowing the ego to be the main driver of the seat of consciousness, right? It's allowing your more authentic self or your deeper self to be through there. And working through the ego, and we can work through like these wounded traits of the ego to bring the ego into more self-awareness, into more self-reflection or self-inquiry, and
Mm.
asking those more important questions, and coming to going to self-compassion and into self-love and self-worthiness. And that's how we can move like these wounded self into this more kind of integrated ego that's there to help drive us forwards. And our ego is there to help serve us as well. Like our ego is there to really perceive outside and external threats, because
Mm.
it's trying to keep us safe. It's trying to protect us, and that's what it's always doing. Which is why we feel so much more comfortable in certain areas of our life, even if it doesn't serve us. We'll stay there because it feels safe. It feels comfortable. So
Mm.
then we need to kind of flip the script, and do something completely different, so that we can move out of those traits.
Mm.
Because most of the time, if people haven't done a lot of self development work, they will view life through the lens of the wounded self. Like they will see things differently, they'll hear things differently, they'll see it as a victim, they'll hear it as a victim,
Mm.
rather than being more empowered within that. So then, as we start to address, like what areas of your life are you still judging others? What area of your life are you denying things in? What areas of your life are you still trying to justify yourself or prove yourself?
Mm.
What areas are you still seeking external validation? What areas of your life are you still trying to control things?
Mm.
And looking into those, and then starting to loosen the grip of what you're trying to control, or why are you trying to control that? What part of you is still seeking validation, and why are you seeking validation from somebody else?
Mm. This is a based on my experience through life. A lot of my focus has been business, and a lot of my friends have been in business, and so a lot of the people that I'm connected with or know are successful businessmen, and I see that as an example of a high functioning wounded self, and
Uh-huh.
one that's championed in society, which is confusing. I found it quite confusing because I'm being celebrated and rewarded externally for my wounded self. And then it's self-perpetuating. Oh, I'll do more of it.
Uh-huh.
But then I still like the underlying feeling of emptiness underneath because of the immature ego and the lack of awareness on the wounded self. But still, it's confusing. And it still does confuse me sometimes when I slip back into the wounded self, because I'm like, hang on, I've just spent all this time doing this work. I'm actually like right now, my revenue in my business is less than what it was 3 years ago. And even though I'm way more whole, grounded, a loving ability to give and receive love, trustworthy, and all these quote, my fulfillment is a lot higher. But when I slip into the wounded self,
Mm-hmm.
there's that weird, that interesting, because some people's wounded self is just seems to be a loss, like a lose lose, even though it's they're meeting their needs and feeling safe through it. It's like the way that they've learned to cope and feel safe is to be a aggressive, mean, sour victim. It's like their life sucks, they're broke, they can't hold a relationship. But then, like with my wounded self, it was actually pretty high functioning
Mm-hmm.
compared to more of like a victim wounded self, which made it quite confusing. And I know a lot of people, even most likely a lot of people listening to this interview will be able to relate to that, where their wounded self and trying to prove themselves has served them a lot. And when that fuel is taken away, because it is still fuel, then it's kind of like this state of fullness. When it hasn't fully integrated to a new form of flow, then there's like the fuel's been taken away from the old wounded self strategy to move and take action. And now there's just this fullness, but without any inertia.
Mm-hmm.
Can you relate to that or comment to that?
Yeah, man. I mean, like for yourself, bro, we're still human. Like you're still human, so you're gonna go in and out of it, and it's just having the tools that are gonna help you pull yourself back out of that.
Yeah.
And that's just that's life, man.
Mm.
And a lot of people, like when they're working through this wound itself, like if they're always trying to prove themselves, this comes down from the father wound as well. Like most people that have like a deep father wound are always trying to prove themselves worthy of love.
Mm.
And you can look at people, and some people, if they've know that if they have learned that they're going to get receive love through accomplishments, and they're going to do whatever it takes to receive that accomplishment. But on the other side, man, if some people have felt loved when they get punished, then they going to easily fall into these self punishment places, because there's this unconscious trait of knowing that there's some sort of love there, even though it's not exactly what they're looking for.
So as a
And
kid, it could have been that there's two options: is either be punished or be ignored, and they'd prefer the punishment, and in some cases, and presence that comes with that
yeah,
attention being placed on them versus just nothing.
so, yeah, a lot of this gets formed, as kids, and this is where we learn, what is acceptable, what's not acceptable, what's going to bring us love, acceptance, going to bring us connection, and then what's going to bring us pain, punishment, and separation, and everything that we have learned that's going to bring us, love, connection. Um, we are going to bring that into our personality, right?
Mm,
Like our mask. This is how we know that we're going to receive love.
yes.
Everything that we have learned that's going to bring us pain and punishment, we go, fuck, I don't want to be there. So I'm going to suppress that deep down inside, and that becomes our shadow.
Mm,
But our shadow, like, like 95% of our habits are all unconscious. So if you have never done any kind of shadow work, more than likely your shadow is running the show more than what you know. And there's, like,
mm,
you have your own personal shadow, you have shadows that come up within relationship, shadows that come up within culture, shadows that come up within your family, shadows that come up within business. There's like a lot of business shadows that get played out. Um,
So can we give some examples of these like random shadows, just so people get a gist of like how it could be blocking them if they had this
yeah, so
shadow without awareness?
so personal shadows, like your own emotions, could be your anger, could be, shame, could be aggression, anything like that that you have learned that's, going to bring you pain and punishment. You push that in there. But what we also suppress in there is also our intelligence, our creativity, our joy. And so
Mm,
we like call that like your golden shadow, like your own God-given gifts, your hidden talents, your own innate essence. That's
mm,
why shadow work is so powerful, because we suppress these deep, powerful gifts in there as well. Because you might have been made fun of as a child for being intelligent in class, or you might have
mm,
got really well. You might have got some really high marks on a test, and then other kids make fun of you, and you go, "Oh, actually, I'm just going to dumb myself down." This is something that from my own personal life. So I dumb myself
mm,
down because I kept getting made fun of, and then so you suppress your your intelligence down. Same with creativity. You might start to draw, you might start to sing, and then someone makes fun of you, and then you go, "Oh, that doesn't feel good to me. I'm going to suppress that." Right. So that's your personal shadow.
mm,
In family shadows, this can look like family abuse that happens. It can look like um, the things that happen within the family dynamics that no one else can know, and it could be like parents' infidelity. It could be abuse that happens between family members, and that
mm,
gets pushed down into the family shadow. Cultural shadows, and it depends on what the culture deems as being acceptable and what isn't acceptable.
mm,
Like say for in Australia, it's more acceptable to be the underdog in Australia, and we have that tall poppy syndrome. So anyone that looks like they're doing something better than them, they automatically want to cut that down.
mm,
That forms into the shadow of say like Australian culture. You could look at like maybe Brazil and Muslim countries. Like Muslim are very want to be fully clothed and contained in there, and in Brazilian cultures, a lot of uh, sexuality, a lot of expressive movements in dance, and you can see how like the those shadows are different through there.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
So these shadows are like, say, for example, because I see this. So for me, like if I was told off for being angry, I could hold anger in a shadow, and it's like it just whatever gets suppressed will be expressed unhealthily. So it'll probably leak through in
yeah,
like a passive kind of way. Or
yeah,
like if
because
a dude suppresses sexuality, then it'll come out with like
uh-huh.
porn, watching porn and
Man,
stuff like
yeah.
that.
So for anytime you suppress something, it's going to come out sideways in some shape or form. Like
Mm,
our body is always seeking unity, like our soul is always seeking unity, and we pretty much split ourselves by, bringing some things into the light, some things into the shadow. We've split out who we are. So
Mm,
it's always seeking, energy seeks expression, right? So it's seeking to be seen, to be embraced in some shape or form. And so yeah,
mm,
if you have suppressed your anger, you'll fall into people pleasing. You'll fall into, passive aggressiveness. You'll fall into, making fun of people, or a lot of judgment. And guys that have
mm,
suppressed their sexuality, will will go into, especially if they have hidden desires they don't want to express, they will find that through porn. Some guys that have really suppressed their own sexual energy, will go into rape, and I mean that's a whole different kind of area, but
yeah.
um, and they've like suppressed this like predator energy within them,
Mm,
and this predator energy is in both men and women, but they've like suppressed that because they feel like it's unhealthy in whatever shape or form, and that will just kind of leak out sideways, and so you know as soon as you can really see your shadows get expressed whenever you start to become a little bit more unconscious, and that can look like when you're really tired, when you're really hungry, when you're
mm,
stressed, when you do drugs, when you do alcohol, anytime that kind of takes you out of your normal your ordinary state of consciousness, your shadows really start to express itself.
wow. That's so interesting.
And I think like when the special forces do all their trainings with everyone, and they like cut out how much sleep they have, how much food they have. They put them under undue stress because they're really trying to see what their true character is. And a lot of people's shadows will start to come out, like if they only think about themselves, if they think about other people as well, or
Mm,
they just end up for themselves.
that's
Yeah,
so interesting. Such a good point. It's like what you'd want to know because as soon as you get to war, that's you're going to be under massive fight or flight, in
yeah,
massive fight or flight, and put into the most stressful state you could possibly be in. Super
yep.
interesting, man. Thank you for
Mm.
sharing. So, um, man, there's so many things that we've covered so far. I've got one more question that I'd like to ask, but I've got a feeling we're going to do lots of podcast episodes together, so we'll save some of that stuff. But man, before I ask my last question, where would you like to direct people who have engaged in this and just felt how legendary you are and how embodied you are and want to continue to learn from you? Uh, I always encourage our listeners to follow the people that are interviewed on Instagram, and mainly on Instagram, but wherever the person's most active, and send them a message. Would you like people to do that? Would you like to tell them about your upcoming course that you're running for men as well?
Yeah, so if anyone wants to find me, I'm most active on Instagram. It's just Tim Morrison 2 underscores. And
Cool.
this next course I'm running starts October 14th, but it's in Perth, so it's an in-person event. And it's 8 weeks. It's called Invictus. It's an 8 week men's course, 8 weeks, 11 sessions, and it's really a deep dive. It's a lot of breakthrough sessions. It's yeah, really really powerful. So, but if you are in Perth and you want to do that, then yeah, hit me up. Otherwise, you also have our Soul Flight ceremony coming up
Yes.
October 18th. So we're doing
Mm.
that in person in Perth, but we also have an online option as well, where people can tune in online. So you
Mm.
can find tickets for that as well on my
We can
Instagram.
put them in the show notes, both of them.
Right.
But I highly encourage you to follow Tim and just keep an eye out because this episode, I'm not sure exactly when it'll come out. Might come out after that. People might be listening to this after that date. But I did the last Soul Flight experience with Tim, and it was amazing. And this necklace that I'm wearing that the listeners can't hear, but any viewers on YouTube would be able to hear. I got this necklace as a result of being in the soul flight journey, and one of the prescribed prompts that Tim gave. These soul flight journeys, people are going to be like, what the fuck's a soul flight journey? Is incredible. Like Tim is a musician and a conscious musician and plays so many different instruments and then loops them all and creates this amazing ceremonial deep journey to allow people to do you want to explain the effect that it has on someone that's participating?
Yeah, so it's so soft light is a blend between like a cacao ceremony, a little bit of breathwork meditation, and these shamanic sounds. So I channel sounds. I channel sounds from the earth, from the star people, from people individually and collectively, and it's a really deep. It's like very nourishing, but it's also really healing. at the same time. And the way that sound and the breath works in cacao is medicine of the heart, really invites people to tap into those deeper parts of themselves and really remember their own truth of who they are. And the sound, it really helps bypasses the analytical mind, and it taps right into the body. And so these sounds that I use are there to evoke different emotions, to help release, to help clear, to help bring back that state of remembrance for people. Yeah, it's a powerful journey we've been running for the last like 3-4 years, and they've like been full every single one. They just get bigger and better all the time. And the way I use with sound, I mean, we could probably do a whole podcast just on this, but with the sound, use it with the way I loop is to help through like brain entrainment as well, to help carry this sacred thread, take people on this sacred thread of sound through this journey, through this weaving. Yeah, it's an incredible experience. It's one that you just you have to receive to really understand what it's about.
You could know nothing about spirituality or personal development or spiritual development or shamanism or anything, and just sit there and just love the music because it's beautiful, and it takes you on this, what the reason it's called a soul flight journey is because it takes you on a journey, and it was so incredible. I'm definitely going to just keep attending these, because
Thanks, brother.
I bought a ticket for my friend who told me about the soul flight journeys and kind of gifted it for her, but she'd already attended 2 others, and she was so pumped to come again for a 3rd time. So we're just going to keep rocking up because it's just a no-brainer. But it's really it's amazing that you play the instruments live and loop them live and keep the thread, as you were saying, going throughout the whole experience. It's really incredible. It's good channeling. So yeah, highly recommend going to that and just following at Tim Morrison _, and send him a message. Send him a message and just let him know what you got from the podcast. It's so nice to receive. For me personally, I know it's really nice to receive people's personal experiences or reflection points from podcasts, and knowing how it made a difference to you. It's always really nice. Awesome. Before I ask my last question, man, I really just wanted to take a moment to honor you for doing the work in such a profound, deep, vulnerable, open way. Like, your journey in your life it's such a gift, and I'm so grateful that we've become friends and I get to learn from you and feel your energy. I really tapped into a quite a grounded place the moment we started chatting this morning, and I know that you have that effect on people because you've done so much of the work. You really have done a lot of work, and you embody what it is that you teach and what you believe in. You really are a gift to this world, man. So thanks for being you. Thanks for coming on today. I'm excited for many more podcasts in the future.
Thank you, brother. I really appreciate that, man. Thank you for the words.
Big love, man. So last question before we wrap up is, if I escorted a random person into the room with you and they had like a mask on, you couldn't see their face, that you didn't know whether they were a man or a woman, but essentially the gist was they handed you a briefcase with $1 million in it that you got to use for whatever you wanted. It's just like, but all they want in exchange is what you would objectively consider to be the biggest and most valuable piece of advice that you could give someone, or a single tool that you could give someone. What would you give in exchange for that $1 million that can't be customized to the person?
I would pass on how to breathe. To breathe deep.
Amazing. And can you give some quick little tips on the cues that you would give for them to breathe deep?
Just close your eyes, breathe in through your nose deep into your belly. Just allow yourself to drop into your body. As you're exhaling out through the mouth, and as you're exhaling out, just dropping more into your own softness. And just continue the breathing and receiving yourself, receiving your own breath. Yeah, something like that, brother.
It's beautiful. I dropped in. I could have just sat there for hours. And I might after this podcast. I just wanted to mention, like, that is such a beautiful example of the actual stuff that holds the most value is usually valued the least in this society. Like, breath is free.
Mhm.
And in exchange for $1 million, you tell someone to access what they have access to every moment, but often don't
Mhm.
give themselves that gift. Meditation is free. You know, playing music is art. It's like quite a cheap thing. You can play music by humming, singing.
Uh-huh.
Walking in nature is free. It's all these gifts are free. And I really encourage those that listen to the podcast today just to give yourself the chance to at least try before you deny any
Mhm.
of these principles around fundamentally owning yourself as a human being and giving yourself that gift of freedom from the inside out, as opposed to seeking it with validation and externals.
Mhm.
And you are such an embodiment for that, man. So thanks again for jumping on. I've had an absolute blast.
Welcome, bro. Thank you for having me.